Good morning and welcome to another week of Journey with Christ. I'm your host, Mark Mitchell, preaching minister here at the Park Avenue Church of Christ in Charleston, West Virginia. And I'm joined as always by our expert. We'll quit calling him a resident. We're trying to remedy that.
If I moved, I wouldn't be a resident.
You wouldn't be a resident. How's it going today, buddy?
It's gone pretty good. We had a really nice weekend. Had a very nice service yesterday at Park Avenue. They had a guest speaker, excellent sermon. It was entitled Humility and How I Achieved It.
Yeah.
It seemed like he knew a lot about the subject.
Yeah.
But we had pretty good attendance, and I think we're going in an upward direction because of the virus is still there and it's still killing people, but maybe we're seeing the end, I hope.
Well, part of it too, I think, is honestly, people are beginning to realize some of the parameters by which things were presented to us were not really fully scientific.
That's true.
I mean, don't get me wrong. I'm all in favor of precautions, but precautions went too far.
And
it scared people
to
an
men, and I do not put myself in that category. There were some geniuses that were working on this. How many men use the phrase, "We just go by the science"? And there are people on the other side of the coin that were saying, "We just follow the science."
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, we had a contradiction in assumptions, I think. And of course, I think sometimes people just use that expression, "we follow the science," just to justify that, hey, I know what I'm doing. Well, yeah. But it was a great day. Steve did a great job. You did a great job presenting the lesson, and it was a great day all of all.
If you'd like to read it. I'll keep it for later.
Save it for later.
Yeah.
Because I've got another letter that someone else gave me, but I'm not gonna read that one either.
Well, this congregation is a joy. We're not very big. Every once in a while we hit 50 or 55. We're not very big, but it's a joy to be a part of a family that, for the most part, get along very well.
Yeah, and you know what? Surprisingly, in the last year, we've added a few people now that weren't here before pre-pandemic. So, we're making inroads, I think, but we'll see. Through circumstances, we didn't have one last week, but if you remember it's kind of hard to remember every 2 weeks, we've been talking about the response that people had in their encounter with Jesus, depending on what his topic was and various things. And Steve has put this together, and it's been really good. Today, Steve has selected sort of like a subtitle of correct or compassionate. Won't you tell us where we're going with this?
Where we're going with this is there are laws in the Old Testament and New Testament. And some people have an idea that those laws are black and white. You follow those laws and you follow them to the T. And there's no variance. God gave those laws to be followed, and that's what we're supposed to follow. And then the next thing you find out is God says in some cases it's all right to break the law.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not condoning this totally, but there was a guy named John Fletcher who back in the early 70s wrote a book, Situation Ethics.
Mm-hmm.
And he took a lot of beating from other people in the Christian world that said, that's not right, you can't do it. And he gave examples like a policeman is driving down the road and he sees some guy goes by him 100 miles an hour and maybe he's kidnapped somebody. Well, the policeman knows he's not supposed to go above the speed limit, so he just drives real slow behind, just at the speed limit. Well, he's not going to catch anybody.
No.
So what's the good thing to do? What is the wise man trying to do? And some of these passages in the Old Testament speak to that, and we want to read one of them in Leviticus. Leviticus 25, beginning with verse 5. What grows of itself in your harvest you shall not reap, and the grapes of your undressed vine you shall not gather. Okay, this is kind of a significant, weird kind of command. You normally use your fields to raise your crops. Don't do that this year. Don't raise any crops at all. And then there are other passages where Moses will write they were supposed to leave the corners of the fields for people who were poor. So it's not exactly all black and white all the time. It shall be a year of solemn rest for the land, and the Sabbath of the land shall provide food for you yourself, and for your male and female slaves, and for your hired servant and sojourner who lives with you. For your cattle also, and for the beasts that are in your land, all its yield shall be for food. And you shall count 7 weeks of years, 7 times 7 weeks, so that the time of the 7 weeks of years shall be to you 49 years. 7 times 7. Then you shall send abroad the loud trumpet of the 10th day of the 7th month. On the Day of Atonement you shall send abroad the trumpet throughout all your land, and you shall hallow the 50th year, and proclaim liberty throughout the land to all its inhabitants. It shall be a jubilee for you, when each of you shall return to his property, and each of you shall return to his family. Now, the average Jew, when he read this, people in the centuries in which these people lived, that whole paragraph right there is something totally different than what God told them before. Mm-hmm. This is what you're supposed to do. This is how you're supposed to treat people. This is how you're supposed to use your farmland. And then he starts over in Leviticus 25 and he says, but I have some exceptions. And those exceptions are, make the corners of your fields adequate and make them accessible to people who are poor. And also, he says, this principle about not sowing seed or grain on the Sabbath, that may be a little bit different too. You don't do it on the 7th Sabbath. You don't do it on the 49th Sabbath. And so these people are trying to figure out what's the correct way to do this. Well, God's told them the correct way, and that's backed up with the word that you mentioned a little while ago, compassion. These verses in here are for compassion, to help people who don't have as much as we have, or they had, and don't have any food. So make sure that seventh year is special, and make sure all those other Sabbaths are special too.
You know, a lot of people, and I have a friend of mine who was very extensively studied in Hebrew and Hebrew understandings and scholarship and so forth, who's anybody who reads the law as God's perfect attitude and behavior for perfection has misunderstood the purpose. Mm-hmm. The purpose was to bring Christ, and he needed these folks as a group to make it and live and function. Most of the clean and unclean things are all bacterial related.
Yeah.
Most of the things you just read there about is in order to create harmony and alleviate some of the problems that come up because of when people begin to starve, wars and so forth come up. I mean, look at the world we live in today. It is just inundated with animosity from rich to poor to middle class. There's a overwhelming resentment that comes up when people are left out. So God instituted a great deal of behaviors and instructions to help alleviate that kind of interaction between his children, Israel.
Well, let's look at another passage that has kind of the same idea, same intention. This one's also found in the Old Testament. 1 Samuel is in the Old Testament. 1 Samuel 21, beginning with verse 1. Then came David to Nob to Ahimelech the priest, and Ahimelech came to meet David trembling and said to him, Why are you alone and no one's with you? And David said to Ahimelech the priest, The king has charged me with a matter and said to me, Let no one know anything of the matter about which I send you and with which I have charged you. I have made an appointment with these young men for such and such a place. Now then, what have you at hand? Give me the 5 loaves of bread, or whatever is here. And the priest answered David, I have no common bread at hand. Okay, the common bread is what everybody was eating except the royalty, the kings, the queens, the princes, the people who are higher up in the religious order. Those people didn't eat the common bread. They ate something that we'll read in a minute. And the priest answered David, I have no common bread at hand, but there is holy bread. If only the young men had kept themselves from women. If they just kept themselves from women, they could eat common bread.
Or holy bread.
Or holy bread. And David answered the priest, Of a truth, women have been kept from us as always when I go on an expedition. The vessels of the young men are holy, even when it's a common journey. How much more today will their vessels be holy? So the priest gave him the holy bread. Gave who?
David.
David, the holy bread. There was no bread there but the bread of the presence, which is removed from before the Lord, to be replaced by hot bread on the day it is taken away. Now you and I read this and go, what in the world is going on here? But basically, somebody's going to end up with some bread who wasn't qualified to eat that bread. And Jesus even talked about doing the same thing. He said that people got upset with him because he did work on the Sabbath. Well, not work, he did a miracle towards people on the Sabbath. They didn't like that. The reason they didn't like that is because here was a law that was correct, but that law was also compassionate.
Well, everyone knows, as you've brought up with the example of the policeman, I mean, it's sort of like anybody who's had to rush a child to the hospital.
You can just go the speed limit.
Yeah, you can just go the speed limit. Don't turn right on, do not turn right on red, especially if the sign's out there. I mean, there's all these variables that come into play. That's sort of like, that would be, if you were sick, come to church anyway, because, so there is some understanding here, and it is vital for us to understand there is under normal circumstances, a behavior that God demands, but in circumstances which are critical or important, compassion trumps that particular law.
Correct. And that's what he's trying to tell them here.
Well,
Jesus even said, hey, David ate some of the bread that he wasn't supposed to be eating, but that was okay to do that because these men were starving.
Yeah.
I mentioned about the policemen or firefighters or anybody who drives a vehicle who's going to try to be at a certain place at a certain time and he's not going to drive the speed limit. Nobody's arrested for that. Now, sometimes bad things happen when that's done, but nobody's arrested for that. I was watching a lady comedian on TV a few nights ago, and she said she was speeding, she admitted it, and the cop pulled her over, and the state trooper walks up to the door and says, do you know why I pulled you over? And she said, was it the 2 bodies in the trunk? Well, now if you're chasing somebody who has 2 people in the trunk of their car it's okay to go with the speed limit.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, there's many elements that we could put up into this. I mean, even Paul had to deal with it a little bit. I'm sure that when already in the world that Paul and Timothy lived in, people were trying to make the consumption of alcohol an issue. And Paul tells Timothy, hey, drink some.
And he tells them other places, don't get drunk.
Yeah, don't get drunk. But if you've got things that's going on in your life, I mean, some of the drugs people buy without a prescription, they're illegal.
Yeah.
But with a prescription, does that paper make it magical? No. It gives reason for the moment. And that's what we need when we're trying to ascertain whether something is command or compassion. You got to have some reason for the moment. And I guess I'll go ahead and read from Mark chapter 2, because this is all part...
Well, let's finish the one in 1 Samuel first.
Oh, I thought you got
No,
that.
there's a couple more things I wanted to say.
Oh, okay.
Now, don't anybody take this as me saying you have permission to do this, because I've never had any alcoholic thing in my life. So I'm not telling people you can go out and drink if you want to, because I don't believe that at all. And what you said a little while ago was, Paul's words are sometimes, don't get drunk with don't get drunk with the Spirit. Get drunk with wine. Don't get drunk with the Spirit. And so here's a law that they're supposed to follow, but he says here's an objection. Here's another thing that you ought to consider. There was oh my gosh, this is 20 years ago. Susie and I were working at South Park, and it was so funny because I made an announcement once about the kids at South Park. We were going to take them somewhere, and this lady came up to me after church and said, you shouldn't call those kids from South Park. She thought I was referring to the
TV show.
And I said, no, I'm talking about the kids who live at South Park.
Yeah.
They live on South Park Road. So Susie and I were up there one afternoon in the summer. They got their lunch every day at summer. I mean, at noon during the summer. And they had a rule. The rule was you could come in and get one bag and take that bag with you. Now, the reason they had that rule was you don't want a kid coming in there packing up as many as he can get or stick them in his backpack and take 20 bags. You want each kid to make sure each kid's got a bag. Well, this little girl that I'd known for several months, she'd been coming to church, she said, my sister is sick, is it all right if I take her one? And I said, yeah, sure. Well, she picks one up and starts to walk out the door. Well, the lady who's the director of the whole thing, she sees her and she's got 2 bags. So she says, honey, you have to put one of those bags back. So I explained to her what she had told me. She said, the rule is you take one bag. And I said, well, the rule's there because you don't want a bunch of people coming in here taking 5 and 10 and 20. The rule is not for a little girl who's 10 years old and is sick and has been in bed the last 2 days. She said, she will not take that out of here. And I said, okay. Now don't act like I was brave, because I wasn't. I said, if you don't let her take that bag out, I'm not coming up here to help you anymore. She said, well, that's fine with me. So I just sat down and waited until the session was over. She came over and said, you know I'm going to report you. I said, report me to as many people as you can, because 95% of the people are going to agree with me that it's okay to take an extra bag for a sick sister. But if you follow the law only, just follow the principle and the law and said, you can't go past this, you've taken one.
Yeah. And you're not, it's not that you're making exceptions. You're making allowances.
Yes.
And Jesus...
And you're being compassionate.
Right. Well, I mean, we are going to read the Mark 2.
You read it.
Okay. One Sabbath, Jesus was going through the grain fields, and as disciples walked along, they began to pick up some heads of grain. The Pharisees said to him, "Look, why are they doing with what is unlawful on the Sabbath?" He answered, "Have you ever read what David did when he and his companions were hungry and in need? In the days of Abiathar the high priest, he entered the house of God and ate the consecrated bread, which is lawful only for priests to eat. And he also gave some to his companions. Then he said to them, the Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. So the Son of Man is Lord even of the Sabbath." He rules the rules of the Sabbath.
Yes.
And again, I think we've got this intellectually. The problem is our nature of judgment and condemnation, and the very fact that we have become so inundated with watching other people and making judgment calls as pertains to how they're doing things or why they're doing things has got out of hand. One of my favorite sayings is, all of us want to be judged by our intentions, but when it comes to others, we don't give them that slack. Our intent is most of the time to do what is right. Do we every now and then mess up? Yeah. But if one of the advantages that God has, and this concept is throughout the Bible, God judges the heart. Oftentimes, what we intend to have happen has a good purpose behind it. Now, I know that we've got some examples in the Old Testament where when the man who puts his hand up to stop the Ark of the Covenant dies.
His name's Uzzah.
You know, David becomes enraged at God for killing him. But see, when you trace that circumstance out, that judgment was actually a judgment on David because he didn't follow any of the rules. And by not following the rules to carry the ark, Uzzah dies because of David's not obeying what God told him to do.
And when I read that passage, first of all, it's a strange passage. But when I read that passage, I'm thinking, why weren't the other guys killed that were carrying it? He wasn't carrying it by himself.
No, but he put his hand up and touched it when it was about to fight.
It.
Yeah.
But they were not carrying it the way they were supposed to carry it.
Exactly. If the priest had been carrying it and doing everything the way that God said, I honestly believe there would have been a different outcome to the event. Imagine some priests carrying with the poles, or going along a mountain edge, someone trips, and the thing's about to fall over the hill, and you're going to say God's going to kill the man who stops it? I don't think so. We've got too many other instances where God doesn't look at it that way. But David was told, he knew he wasn't supposed to be doing this. This was a job for the priest to be doing, and he had his own soldiers out there doing it.
And David also was the one who ate that bread in the tabernacle.
But that time his purpose was pure.
Yes.
This time, in that one moment, it wasn't. I mean, God judges the intent of the heart and looks at what your intent is here. I mean, God can do that, whereas you and I can't. We operate under a different set of guidelines, but at the same time, God does call us to be compassionate as we're dealing with people. I mean, those Pharisees, they were looking at Jesus and his disciples and saying, I know your intent. You're trying to break the law. And Jesus says, no, these guys are hungry. I mean, there's a difference. We've been traveling.
There's a big difference between somebody walking into a grocery store and taking a loaf of bread because his kids are out in the car hungry.
Yeah.
And a guy who takes a pole and smashes the windows of a storefront so he can go get a TV.
Yeah.
Now, basically, two things are happening that are kind of close, but like you said, the motive is a little bit different.
Yep. Absolutely.
Did you want to say anything else about chapter 2 in Mark?
Well, no, I mean, for the most part, I think we've covered this pretty good. I mean, there is a difference in our reaction to Jesus when he tells us something. It's not, we are given instructions, but we're also given a heart to make determinations periodically to what extent of how far we go with what we're told. Again, compassion still yet operates as a condition by which we make our decisions.
There are two words here in the Old Testament in the passage in the New Testament in Mark chapter 2. Two words that I think are very significant. Have you never read what David did when he was in need and was hungry?
Yeah.
Look at those two things. He was in need and he was hungry. I think David is saying, my men can do that. And Jesus later reinforces that and says it was okay for David to do that.
Yeah.
If I know that a family is needy and hungry, and I see them walking away with a loaf of bread and some meat,
Another bag. You have no choice but to stand up for that child.
I would have to do that because that's not the correct thing to do. That's the
compassionate thing to do. And compassion, it's honestly, this is where Peter gets his understanding that love covers over a multitude of sins. Mm-hmm. It's the concept that when your treatment of others will allow God to look over a lot of things that you're doing.
And when a college-age kid takes a baseball bat and breaks the windows on a car or breaks the windows on a storefront, because his logic is, hey, there's been a fight out in the street, I think I deserve a Sony.
Yeah.
I mean, that's not logical.
No, they have too much. I don't have the equivalent of what they've got, so I can take from them. That's not compassion. That's just greed and civil discourse. There is a word that was quite popular years ago. Steve, is not quite as popular today. There takes a level of temperance. Mm-hmm. And for anybody who maybe doesn't know the etymology of that word, temperance comes from the understanding of like when steel would be heated and cooled, and it would make it stronger. When you look at what the maybe rules of steel that God has placed, as some people look at them, there are moments where they're going to be heated and cooled. They're going to be really enacted, and then sometimes they're not going to be. That's not as important right now. There's stuff that goes on in life that gives us not an excuse, but gives us a little leeway that we wouldn't otherwise have.
Yeah. The main thing we learned from these two passages is there were some human needs involved, and those human needs always involve details and what is actually needed. So sometimes we make judgments about things that we don't know anything about. We see something happen, and we don't know anything about the background, anything about what happened 5 minutes before that. So we need to do that. We need to look at human needs. We need to get as many details as we can and make sure that those needs are met, even if it means breaking the law on some occasions.
That's
But
right.
if you got up this morning and you said, I'm going to break the law 10 times today, you're just looking to be a lawbreaker.
Yeah.
But if you get up and say, I'd like to see 10 episodes today where I'm compassionate with somebody,
Yeah, you might be pushing the limit sometime.
you might be pushing the limit, but we still go back to what you said. It's the intent of the heart.
Intent of the heart. I guess that's going to kind of finish us up for this week, Steve, because there's no way to really get started into another section with the amount of time we have available to us. But I would like to make mention of something that honestly, for reasons that are kind of private to Steve, I'm going to do a compassionate thing. For those of you who do not know, well, you do know that Steve has been dealing with issues for the last several years related to his health. And this past week, the doctor, we believe, has finally come to a conclusion. And Steve was diagnosed with a form of Parkinson's disease, and he's began his treatment. I would just make mention of it to you. It's for those of you who, Steve announced it yesterday at church, but that was in a private setting among those who are in attendance at church. But I'm letting those of you who watch this and will not get that opportunity. So keep Steve and Susie both in your prayers as the procedures continue to go, and we're praying for the best.
Well, thank you, Mark. I know it's going to be tough. I admit that. But one of the things that might affect me is I can't remember what I was going to say.
Well, you understand that even those without Parkinson's are... Let's see, what was I going to say? I still deal with that myself. In fact, one time today, I lost a word. I couldn't find it. I tell people it's sort of like, for me, I know the words on the desk, I just can't find it on the desk. You know? It's like a piece of paper. I've lost it, but I know it's here. I just got to find it.
And your dad would say, well, where did you have it last?
Where did you have it last? Well,
I didn't get up and walk away, you know.
Were you following him this past weekend?
No, just thinking of my dad.
Well, and I also had a great weekend this past, well, actually today, on the day we're recording this, is my birthday, August the 1st. And so I've had a great day, and I got a real funny card. Let me go and get it and show it to you. Oh, no, I can't.
Make sure Susie is watching when you read it.
Oh, well, hey, this is where we are today. Well, listen, we will be back again next week. I promise. We're going to get this thing back on track. If we can keep the weather and events coming up in our lives that just kind of like get in the way of activities that are planned.
Next week, we're actually going to stay on topic and study different responses that different people made to Jesus.
That's right. So, well, on behalf of Steve and I, I'm so glad you've tuned in, and we look forward to seeing you again next week. God bless. Have a great day.